before with different cultures, bringing in people to bake foods and stuff. But it's even past that. Research is showing that those DLLs, those children have a lot of good strengths and are really much higher in cognitive functioning and executive functioning than monolingual children.
Right.
And that's what we need to embrace, rather than just teach them English. I think that's one of the problems that we have too. It's not just an issue of DLL teaching children English, it's embracing their culture and bringing their culture into
So I'm
what we
wondering,
have.
do you feel like the culture, embracing culture, could go with the family connections as part of connecting
Possibly
with
it
the families?
could, yeah, it possibly could. I mean, it's different than what I had ever seen in DLL.
And
I
then
started
for the
looking
Head
into
Start, you
research.
just want to know where
Head
where
Start
we should
and-
be looking for
Right.
research.
Head Start and OSEP are also talking about embracing cultures. They have all
Yeah.
different kinds of things of how to embrace cultures rather than how to teach English.
Right.
Sometimes we get on the
Hackathon or-
subject of teaching English as opposed to embracing cultures.
Possibly that could go under instructional strategies, because it's talking about how are we providing instruction and what are all the things we're bringing in to make sure that the children's language big, not language English, is growing.
I'm not sure if it's the same thing or not. I know that we were talking about, like in our group, when we were, in our small group, we were also talking about strategies and things like that. It turned out that our strategies are really how to teach English, not strategies of how to embrace the culture. Does that make sense? But I mean, maybe that's our
I
ultimate goal.
think so, and we do have some information that I think goes a lot along those lines.
Okay.
So keep this in the back of your mind,
Okay.
and when we're done, see how, if it's changed anything, if it's answered any questions, and then we might get a little bit more clarity
Okay.
on
That
where we
sounds-
can put this.
Okay.
Okay,
It's
Nancy?
a real question for
Well,
me.
I'm thinking on what Kay's saying and then what Lori's saying is that by embracing their culture and using our strategies of what they already know in their first language to bridge it to English, that by embracing it, I think, to me, it falls under that social emotional category too, where, you know, if we embrace their culture, we're gonna make them feel good about their language and not that they don't know English yet,
Right.
because especially for hearing children, I think everything that we're reading now
Mhm.
says that the more they have mastered their first language, the easier it is to learn multiple languages, and that, like you just said, our kids that are only speaking English and hear English, they're kind of down here now compared to
Yes.
the way the brains are functioning
Yes,
with the multiple
exactly.
languages.
Function, all the testing now is showing that
Yeah.
And
there's
this,
good
I mean, I
language
think you
in
guys
the
are hitting
voice.
on a lot of the stuff that we found out,
Oh,
so.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
so
going
second step,
through and-
second step
yeah.
might be a good way, and Head Start uses second step also, so we could maybe carry
That
that over
emotional
into
piece.
our second step lessons.
Yeah, it just is all related.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Did you have another category?
It went a lot with Kay's,
Okay.
just teaching strategies for promoting English and fostering home language.
Okay.
That's what we- yeah.
So really that cultural piece. Were there any other categories that we wanted to mention? All right, great. So, our categories are how to deal with absolutely no English at home, addressing the family and creating those family relationships, our expectations specifically around if it's a delay, if it's dual language, and how we plan for those based on those expectations of the different languages. The instructional strategies that we're using, some outside factors that might also be contributing to some language challenges, and then over here a lot about the culture and incorporating that culture in the students' learning. So, like I said, we're gonna these are what's gonna carry us through the rest of the year, and by the end of the day, they might change. Some of the answers you might have gotten your answer, or new things may have popped up. So let's get back into finding some information. Oh, and Melissa's gonna make a nice table of those, so and post it on the Google community so that we can reference it later in our discussions. So next we're gonna move on to defining dual language learners and English language learners and what those two groups of children look like in our program. So we have these definitions up here on your notes page. The English language learners is a little different. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to read these over and make sure you change the definition on your notes page to this definition up here. It's also over there. So just take a minute to read those over, and then we'll come back to discussion.
Joni, I have a question.
The top one's right, the bottom one's not.
So this one is right. Change this one on your notes.
I think the biggest thing is that the DLL students are dropping out so high now. I think the idea, well, the dropout rate of dual language learners, you know, in Spanish speaking children, according to the research, is so much higher. So I think that's why we're trying to embrace those cultures early. That's what that's what I've been reading. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I said. Okay. I just thought I'd mention it. Yeah. Well, I just brought it because I had it in my car.
Is this one you sent me?
Yes. No, I didn't send it to you. It's hard. I just have the heart. It's really good.
Because if we don't get involved.
This is good. Yes. These are the myths. It tells all about the executive functioning. How preparing Spanish kids with English speaking kids who are timid and shy because there's so much more strength in those areas. It's really good. And this too is, I will, they have to start all the research. They're really heavy duty in research. They've got a lot of money. And they have 10. Okay, good. I'll send this one.
All right, so after reading these two definitions, what are some of your thoughts that popped into your head?
I would think that DLL would be more successful in the long run.
You think that DLL would be more successful in the long run as far as education, or
Early on, probably first, second, third grade.
so explain that a little bit more, Kay.
Well, I guess what little bit I know
Uh-huh.
is that dual language learners are learning or simultaneously learning language, and so
Uh-huh.
we know if that's promoted at home, we know that those skills continue. You can still interact with your parents and as well as your peers. In ELL, there's a separation between what their home language is and what they're doing. And so at 6 years old, they're learning a new language or older and trying to acclimate, if you will, to a new language. And what they're finding, according to research I read, I wish I could say what it was, but ELL children are having a hard time staying in school. They're less I don't know if it's ELL, but those who speak a different language, home language, are more of our higher dropout rate now
So
than other children.
I
don't know
think
how
what
it
my
but I don't
understanding
know how
of
it
it,
compares to DLL.
yeah, my understanding of it was that, and please help.
Yeah.
Is that a dual language learner are those that are not consistently exposed to English, have not been in school yet, and then can actually become an English language learner. So it's more
I
of like
wasn't
an
looking like
age,
that.
almost an age thing, or
Oh,
an
okay.
amount of exposure to English. So our dual language learners are the population that we're working with, and there's not
Preschoolers.
across the board consistent amount of English instruction, so that they
Okay.
can't be considered an English language learner until they've had a consistent amount of instruction in English and then been assessed to determine whether or not they require more support to be successful in their educational setting.
Right.
Is that, am I?
We got both of the
Definition.
definitions from a resource that ESOL sent us to, which was the SWEDA, and I'll explain more about it later, but basically, the way they defined it is dual language learners don't have a solid foundation in one language. They may have been receptively in that language for a while, but their amount of expressive language never took off to the point that that was truly their foundational language, and then English was added to it. So a lot of our guys in that 2 to 5 range have maybe heard a home language a lot, heard a little bit of English on TV, culture, whatever, and then they're still not talking. And because they're delayed in that home language, that's why they have a delay, not because they're a 2-language learner, but because they never finished establishing their foundation in their first language and it was late. They start getting services and they may be exposed to 2 languages from us or maybe even within the family. An English language learner student is one that truly had a foundation. They understood and spoke effectively in their foundational language, and then they got into an educational setting, and for most of the research we're looking at, when they say English language learner, it's the idea that they came in with a foundation language other than English. Now they're in an English-speaking educational setting, and they're not able to keep up with the knowledge that they're being given because of their lack of English to make the connections, and they can get support. Some kids come in with a foundation in other language, they are able to keep up with the work, and they don't qualify to get services as an English language learner because they're not showing that they need it.
Do they test them all? Oh, sorry.
You don't test until after kindergarten.
Are they testing after kindergarten?
Because they
After
know that they've had a consistent English instruction, and after that time that they can determine whether or not they require additional support.
For you, I think that what I'm hearing and saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the English language learner was not initially delayed in their original language.
The
That's
DLL doesn't
assumption.
have to be delayed either.
Yes.
No,
No.
DLL,
No.
the strict definition is DLL is a child between the ages
Who
of
are
birth and
learning
5 who's
two
learning 2 or more
languages.
languages. And an ELL is truly a child 6 and over, based
already
on the
passed
research,
one.
and that's kind of what we base everything on. This was coming out of the WIDA research. 6 and over, they are an English language learner if the idea is that at 6 and over, they already had a foundation receptively and expressively in another language, and now they're in an educational setting, and they've had exposure to English, and they're not able to keep up with the educational learning.
In English.
So this is kind of separate from the delay, but we wanted to be sure that we were defining these 2 terms because we found that they were interchanged a lot. And we were like, okay, well, are our kids dual language learners or are our kids English language learners? So we wanted to make sure that we were defining the 2 terms, and that when we speak of dual language learners, that's truly our age group that we're working with that, may have some exposure to English, may not have some exposure to
No,
English.
wait, I thought dual language means 2 languages.
It does,
So they have
but
had
their
exposure
exposure
to
to
2
English
languages.
might be just TV. You know
Right,
what I
right,
mean?
right,
It might
right,
not be
right.
spoken in their home, it just might be the
It
TV
is
or
definitely more
in,
than one
in the
language.
community.
Well, and notice
Not
that
consistent instruction.
kids who are learning, like if you were a Spanish speaker, you would be a dual language. You wouldn't have gained all your foundational language skills until about 5 or 6. So if you're learning English on top of that, you don't have basic foundational language skills. It's not until 6 that we feel like, yes, you have a foundation in one language or another.
Or if you're only exposed to one language.
Exactly. I mean, because we still have kids that are delayed that are only speaking English.
Well, and that's the definition of a delay, is it's in both languages.
Exactly.
It's not a delay if it's only in one language. We do have parents who come through who say they can't speak English and they hear English. We think it's a delay. It's not. That's not
It
a
has to
delay.
be in both
It
languages.
has to be in both languages. That's how it's hard to tease out too. But that's okay.
So speaking of our dual language learners, there were some really important things that came out of the research that we wanted to share with you guys, and I think they kind of came up, in our previous discussion as well. One of those things was that it was interesting to learn that, we're kind of born to learn language, and we're born with the capability to learn multiple languages. We can process and store the different sounds of multiple languages and remember the rules of grammar for different languages. And research has showed us that children, even with cognitive disabilities, they're born with this ability to kind of balance both of those languages and achieve them at the same level of competence. So that our English, when we're going in and we're instructing in English, it's not harming the students' overall language acquisition.